Marcus Rodriguez had been reading to the blind man for 3 months when everything changed. Every day at 3 p.m. sharp, this 12-year-old boy would sit beside Harold on that weathered park bench with a worn paperback book, his young voice bringing stories to life for someone who could no longer see the words. What Marcus didn't know was that someone had been watching them, someone who would soon step forward with news that would transform both their lives forever. But as Harold listened to Marcus read that Tuesday afternoon, one question lingered in the autumn air. Could an act of simple kindness bridge the gap between desperate poverty and unimaginable wealth? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button for more real, emotional, life-changing stories like this, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The story began on a September morning when Marcus first noticed the old man sitting alone on the bench. Marcus was walking home from Lincoln Middle School, his backpack heavy with textbooks he couldn't afford to replace, when he saw Harold sitting perfectly still, his clouded eyes staring straight ahead at nothing. The man's clothes were clean but threadbare, his gray hair neatly combed despite the circumstances that had clearly brought him to this bench in Riverside Park. Marcus had always been drawn to people who seemed forgotten by the world. Perhaps it was because he understood that feeling intimately. Living with his grandmother Rosa in a cramped apartment where the electricity sometimes got cut off, and dinner often consisted of whatever they could find in the community food bank donations. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 7, leaving him in the care of his grandmother, who worked 2 cleaning jobs just to keep them afloat. That first day, Marcus approached the bench hesitantly. The old man turned his head slightly when he heard footsteps, his expression hopeful but guarded. "Hello there," Harold said, his voice carrying the refined accent of someone who had once moved in different circles. "Beautiful afternoon, isn't it?" Marcus looked around at the small park, noting the cracked pavement, the overflowing trash cans, and the graffiti on the playground equipment. Beautiful wasn't exactly the word he would have chosen, but something in the man's tone made him nod before remembering that gesture would go unseen. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "It's pretty nice." "I'm Harold," the man said, extending a weathered hand in Marcus's general direction. "Harold Wellington. Marcus Rodriguez," the boy responded, shaking the offered hand. Harold's grip was firm despite his apparent frailty, and Marcus noticed the man's fingers bore the calluses of someone who had worked with his hands, though his speech suggested education and refinement. "Marcus," Harold repeated, as if tasting the name. "That's a strong name. Are you heading home from school?" For reasons he couldn't fully explain, Marcus found himself lingering by the bench instead of hurrying home to help his grandmother prepare dinner. There was something about Harold that drew him in, a loneliness that mirrored his own but seemed deeper, more resigned. "Yes, sir. Lincoln Middle School. It's just a few blocks from here." "Ah, Lincoln Middle School," Harold said with a smile. "I know it well. Tell me, Marcus, do you enjoy reading?" The question surprised Marcus. Most adults asked about his grades or whether he was staying out of trouble, not about his personal interests. "I love reading," he admitted. "I mean, when I can get books. The school library is pretty small, and the public library is way across town." Harold's expression brightened considerably. "Reading is the greatest adventure a person can have without leaving their chair," he said. "Or in my case, their bench. I used to read voraciously, back when—" He trailed off, his fingers unconsciously moving to touch the corner of his eye. "Well, back when I could see the words on the page." Marcus felt a pang of sympathy. He couldn't imagine losing the ability to read, to escape into other worlds, when his own became too overwhelming. "How long have you been—" He stopped, unsure how to phrase the question politely. "Blind?" Harold supplied gently. "About 2 years now. Diabetes complications. It started gradually, then happened all at once. One day I was reading the morning paper, and the next day I couldn't make out the headlines." His voice carried a matter-of-fact sadness that somehow made it more poignant than if he had been openly emotional. An idea began forming in Marcus's mind, wild and impulsive, but feeling absolutely right. "Would you like me to read to you sometime?" he asked. "I mean, if you want. I have some books, and I could come by after school maybe." Harold's face transformed with surprise and something that looked like cautious hope. "You would do that?" For a stranger? You're not a stranger, Marcus said simply. You're Harold. That conversation led to an arrangement that became the most important part of both their days. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, Marcus would arrive at the bench with whatever book he was currently reading. Sometimes it was a classic novel, borrowed from his English teacher. Sometimes a biography or history book that caught his interest. Harold never complained about the selection, seeming grateful simply to have stories flowing around him again. As the weeks passed, their friendship deepened beyond the simple act of reading. Marcus learned that Harold had once been a successful architect, designing buildings across the state before his eyesight began to fail. He had been married to a woman named Catherine for 37 years before she passed away from cancer. They had one daughter, Elena, but Harold's voice always became strained when he mentioned her, and Marcus learned not to press for details. Harold, in turn, discovered that Marcus harbored dreams far beyond his current circumstances. The boy wanted to become a teacher, specifically to work with underprivileged children like himself. "I want to show kids that books can take you anywhere," Marcus explained one afternoon as they sat together in the October sunshine. "That stories can make you forget about being hungry or cold or scared." "That's a noble calling," Harold replied. "Teaching is perhaps the most important profession in the world, but it requires education, college, credentials. That takes money." Marcus's expression clouded over. Money was always the obstacle, the insurmountable wall between dreams and reality. "I know," he said quietly. "My grandmother works so hard just to keep us going day to day. College feels like something that happens to other people." Harold reached over and patted the boy's shoulder. "Never underestimate the power of determination, Marcus. Sometimes opportunities appear when we least expect them." What neither of them knew was that their daily ritual had attracted the attention of someone else. Elena Wellington sat in her black Mercedes sedan parked across the street from the park, watching through tinted windows as a young boy read aloud to her father. She had been conducting this surveillance for almost 6 weeks now, ever since she had hired a private investigator to locate Harold after 2 years of estrangement. Elena was the CEO of Wellington Industries, a construction and development company she had built from the architectural firm her father had once owned. When Harold's eyesight began to fail, he had become increasingly depressed and withdrawn. Their relationship, already strained by Elena's demanding career and his disappointment in her priorities, had deteriorated completely when she suggested he move into an assisted living facility. "I won't be warehoused," Harold had declared during their last terrible argument. "I'd rather live on the streets than sit in some sterile room waiting to die." Elena had stormed out, telling herself she was giving him space to come to his senses. When she returned to his apartment a week later, he was gone. The landlord said he had left in the middle of the night, taking only a small suitcase. Elena's attempts to find him through official channels had failed. He seemed to have deliberately disappeared from any system that might track him. For 2 years, Elena had lived with the guilt and worry, throwing herself into her work with even greater intensity. Wellington Industries had grown exponentially under her leadership, securing contracts for major developments across 3 states. She was worth nearly $50 million, but none of that wealth could fill the void left by her father's absence or ease her regret over their unresolved conflict. The private investigator had finally located Harold, living in a small rooming house 6 blocks from the park, surviving on Social Security, and spending his days on the bench where Marcus found him. Elena's first instinct had been to march over immediately and demand that he come home with her, but something made her hesitate. Instead, she found herself returning day after day, watching from a distance as this young boy devoted his afternoons to bringing joy back into Harold's life. At first, Elena felt jealous and resentful. This child, this stranger, was providing her father with something she had failed to give him: companionship and purpose. But as she observed their interactions, her resentment gradually transformed into admiration for Marcus's dedication and genuine affection for Harold. Elena began researching the boy's background, using resources available to someone of her position and wealth. What she discovered both broke her heart and reinforced her growing respect for him. Marcus Rodriguez lived with his elderly grandmother in subsidized housing, their combined income barely above the poverty line. Despite these circumstances, Marcus maintained excellent grades and had never been in trouble at school. His teachers described him as mature beyond his years, helpful to other students, and passionate about learning. The more Elena learned about Marcus, the more she understood why her father had been drawn to him. Here was a child who embodied the values Harold had always cherished: kindness, determination, and intellectual curiosity, despite facing challenges that would have broken many adults. On a particularly cold November afternoon, Elena watched as Marcus arrived at the bench with his usual book, but also carrying a thermos and a small paper bag. He poured steaming hot chocolate into the thermos cap and handed it to Harold, then produced 2 sandwiches wrapped in aluminum foil. "Rosa made extra lunch today," Marcus explained, though Elena suspected from her observations that this was not true. The boy's grandmother worked grueling hours and barely had resources for their own meals, let alone extras. More likely, Marcus had given up part of his own lunch to make sure Harold had something warm to eat. As Harold accepted the sandwich with obvious gratitude, Elena felt tears streaming down her face. This child was caring for her father better than she had, showing him a love and respect that transcended their vastly different circumstances. Marcus asked for nothing in return, except the pleasure of Harold's company and the opportunity to share stories together. That evening, Elena made a decision that would change all their lives. She would approach them not as the CEO of a major corporation, but as Harold's daughter who had finally found the courage to make things right. The next afternoon, Elena parked her Mercedes in its usual spot, but this time she got out and walked across the street to the park. She had dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, not wanting to intimidate Marcus or create a scene that might embarrass Harold. Her heart pounded as she approached the bench where Marcus was reading from To Kill a Mockingbird, his young voice giving life to Atticus Finch's courtroom speech. Harold sensed her presence first, his head turning toward the sound of unfamiliar footsteps on the path. Marcus paused in his reading, looking up to see a woman in her 40s with dark hair and kind eyes, though her expression seemed nervous and uncertain. "Excuse me," Elena said softly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wondered if I could speak with you both for a moment." Harold's posture stiffened slightly. After 2 years of living on the margins of society, unexpected approaches from strangers usually meant trouble or unwanted attention from social services. "Can I help you with something?" he asked politely, but warily. Elena took a deep breath, her carefully rehearsed words suddenly seeming inadequate. "My name is Elena Wellington," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harold, a new daughter." The book fell from Marcus's hands as Harold's face went through a series of emotions: shock, confusion, recognition, and something that might have been fear. "Elena?" he whispered. "How did you find me?" "I've been looking for you for 2 years, Elena said, moving closer but still maintaining a respectful distance. "I've been watching you and Marcus from across the street for weeks now. I wanted to make sure you were safe before I approached." Marcus looked back and forth between them, trying to process this revelation. Harold had never mentioned that his daughter was actively searching for him, only that they had become estranged. The boy started to stand, thinking he should give them privacy, but Harold reached out and grasped his arm. "Don't go," Harold said firmly. "Marcus, this young man has become very important to me. Whatever you have to say, Elena, he should hear it." Elena nodded, grateful that Marcus remained seated. She had much to say to her father, but she also had something important to discuss with the boy who had shown such remarkable devotion. "Dad, I owe you an enormous apology. The way we parted, the things I said about the assisted living facility, I was wrong. I was scared and frustrated, and I handled everything badly." Harold's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained cautious. "You were trying to do what you thought was best. I understand that now, but I couldn't bear the thought of being locked away somewhere, cut off from the world." "I know," Elena said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "And you weren't cut off from the world at all. You found something beautiful here, didn't you?" She looked at Marcus with genuine warmth. "This remarkable young man who reads to you every day, who brings you lunch and hot chocolate, who treats you with such respect and kindness." Marcus blushed, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's not a big deal," he mumbled. "Harold's my friend. I like reading to him. It is a big deal, Elena said emphatically. Marcus, what you've done for my father, the loyalty and compassion you've shown, it's extraordinary. I've been watching you for weeks, and I've never seen anything like it. Harold turned toward Marcus with surprise. You've been watching us? Elena nodded, feeling embarrassed but determined to be completely honest. I hired a private investigator to find you, and when he did, I couldn't work up the courage to approach immediately. So I would park across the street and watch, making sure you were safe, trying to understand your new life. What I saw was this incredible friendship between you and Marcus, and I realized that he was giving you something I had failed to provide." End quote. Elena, Harold began, but she held up her hand. Please, let me finish. Marcus, I also had you investigated. I know about your living situation, your grandmother, your dreams of becoming a teacher. I know about your grades and your character, and I am incredibly impressed by who you are, despite the challenges you've faced." End quote. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The idea of being investigated felt invasive, but he could see the genuine emotion in Elena's eyes. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "Because I wanted to understand the person who had brought such joy back into my father's life," Elena replied. "And because I have a proposition for both of you, if you're willing to listen." Harold and Marcus exchanged glances. The old man nodded slowly. "We're listening," he said. Elena took another deep breath, knowing that what she was about to propose would sound almost too good to be true. "Dad, I want you to come home with me, not to an assisted living facility, but to my house. It's large enough that you could have your own wing, your own space, but you wouldn't be alone. I work from home most days now, and I could arrange for whatever assistance you need while still respecting your independence." Harold's expression was unreadable. "And Marcus? That's the second part of my proposition," Elena said, turning to face the boy directly. "Marcus, I would like to offer you a place in our home as well, permanently. I would adopt you if your grandmother agrees. Or we could arrange guardianship, whatever works best for your family situation. You would have your own room, access to the best schools in the district, tutoring if needed, and a college fund that would ensure you can pursue your dream of becoming a teacher without financial barriers." Marcus stared at her in stunned silence. The offer was so far beyond anything he had ever imagined that it seemed like something from one of the books he read to Harold. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because you did something for my father that I couldn't do," Eleanor replied. "You showed him unconditional kindness and friendship when he needed it most. You read to him every single day, brought him food when I suspect you barely had enough for yourself, and treated him with dignity and respect. That kind of character and compassion deserves to be rewarded and nurtured." End quote. Harold reached over and took Marcus's hand. "What do you think, my young friend?" Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the offer. It would solve every problem he and his grandmother faced, provide opportunities he had only dreamed of, and allow him to continue his friendship with Harold. But it also felt almost too good to be true, and he had learned to be wary of things that seemed too good to be true. "I would need to talk to my grandmother," Marcus said carefully. "This is a big decision, and I couldn't make it without her." "Of course," Elena said immediately. "I would never expect you to make such a decision alone. In fact, I was hoping we could all meet together, you, your grandmother, my father, and myself. I want everyone to be comfortable with this arrangement." "What about Harold?" Marcus asked, looking at his friend. "What do you want to do?" Harold was quiet for a long moment, his sightless eyes turned toward the sounds of the park around them. "I've been thinking about this bench, this place where we've shared so many stories," he said finally. "It's been a refuge for me, but it's also been a hiding place. Perhaps it's time to stop hiding." "You wouldn't have to give up our reading time," Marcus said quickly. "We could still read together every day if you wanted." "I would love that," Harold replied with a smile. "But imagine how many more books we could explore if we had access to a real library, comfortable chairs, and all the time in the world." Elena felt a surge of hope. "Is that a yes, Dad?" Harold nodded slowly. "I think it's time for both of us to take a leap of faith," he said, squeezing Marcus's hand. "What do you say, Marcus? Are you willing to take this journey with an old man and his daughter?" Marcus looked back and forth between them. These two people who had somehow become central to a life-changing moment he could never have anticipated. "Can I ask you something, Elena?" "Anything. Why is this so important to you? I mean, I understand wanting your father back. But why include me? You don't really know me." Elena considered the question carefully. "You're right. I don't know you well yet. But I know your actions, and actions reveal character better than words ever could. For months, you've shown up for my father every single day. You've shared your food with him, read to him, treated him as a person worthy of respect and friendship. You've done this expecting nothing in return, simply because it was the right thing to do." She paused, her voice becoming more emotional. "I built a successful business, Marcus, but I failed at the most important relationship in my life. I let pride and stubbornness drive away the person who mattered most to me. You, a 12-year-old boy, succeeded where I failed. You gave my father what he needed most, human connection and dignity. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. "What if I mess this up? What if I don't fit in your world? What if you do?" Elena countered gently. "Marcus, you've already proven you can make a difference in someone's life just by being yourself. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking if you'd like the resources and support to become even more of who you're meant to be." Harold squeezed the boy's hand again. "The choice is yours, Marcus. But remember what I told you about opportunities appearing when we least expect them. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all." Marcus looked around the small park that had become so meaningful to both of them, the bench where an unlikely friendship had blossomed into something that would change all their lives. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's talk to my grandmother." The meeting with Rosa Rodriguez took place the following evening in the small apartment she shared with Marcus. Elena had offered to meet anywhere Rosa preferred, but the older woman insisted on her own home, wanting to assess this stranger on familiar ground. Rosa was a small woman with silver hair and weathered hands that spoke of decades of hard work, but her eyes were sharp and protective as she studied Elena. She had listened to Marcus's excited account of the day's events, with a mixture of hope and skepticism that came from a lifetime of disappointments. "You must understand, Miss Wellington," Rosa said in accented English. "Marcus is my whole world. His parents trusted me to raise him, and I have tried my best despite our circumstances. I need to know that this offer is real and that you understand what you're taking on." Elena nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I understand your concerns completely. If I were in your position, I would have the same questions. Let me be completely transparent with you about my situation and my motivations." Over the next hour, Elena explained her estrangement from Harold, her regret over their unresolved conflict, and her growing admiration for Marcus's character as she had observed his friendship with her father. She provided financial statements proving her ability to support the arrangement and references from attorneys and social workers who could vouch for her character. "I'm not trying to replace you in Marcus's life," Elena emphasized. "You will always be his grandmother, the woman who raised him and shaped his values. I'm offering to expand his opportunities while ensuring that your relationship remains strong." Rosa studied Elena carefully. "And what happens if this doesn't work out? What happens to Marcus if you change your mind?" Elena had anticipated this question and had already consulted with her attorney. "I've established a trust fund in Marcus's name that will ensure his education and support regardless of what happens between us. The money is his, not contingent on our personal relationship. Even if our living arrangement doesn't work out, his college education and future security are guaranteed." End quote. Harold, who had been listening quietly from his seat on the small couch, spoke up. "Rosa, may I share something with you?" The older woman nodded, then remembered he couldn't see the gesture. "Of course, Mr. Harold. I lost my wife 2 years ago, and in my grief and stubbornness, I also lost my daughter. I've spent these past years feeling sorry for myself, hiding from the world because I was too proud to accept help or admit I was scared. Then your grandson found me on that bench and reminded me what it means to have someone care about you without expecting anything in return." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "Marcus saved me, Rosa, not just from loneliness, but from giving up on life entirely. He showed me that dignity doesn't come from independence, it comes from connection." from being valued by another person. Elena is offering us both a chance to be a family, something neither of us has had for a long time. Rosa looked at Marcus, who had been unusually quiet during the adult conversation. Mijo, what do you want? This is your life we're talking about. Marcus took his grandmother's weathered hand in his. Abuela, I want you to be happy and not have to work so hard anymore. Elena says there would be a place for you too. A nice apartment near their house, so we could see each other every day. You could retire, maybe take those art classes you always talked about. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She had indeed always dreamed of taking art classes, something she had mentioned to Marcus years ago, and was surprised he remembered. And you? What do you want for yourself? I want to keep reading to Harold, Marcus said simply. And I want to become a teacher, so I can help other kids like me. Elena says she can make that possible. Rosa looked around her small apartment, at the peeling paint and the stack of past due bills on her kitchen table, then back at Elena's earnest face. This seems too good to be true, she said honestly. I understand that feeling, Eleanor replied. But sometimes good things do happen, especially to people who deserve them. Your grandson has shown extraordinary character and compassion. I believe he deserves every opportunity to reach his full potential. Rosa was quiet for several minutes, the weight of the decision heavy in the small room. Finally, she squeezed Marcus's hand and looked directly at Elena. If Marcus wants this, and if you promise to love him and treat him as family, not as a charity case, then we will try. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. I promise, Mrs. Rodriguez. I promise to love him and support him and learn from him, because he's already taught me so much about what really matters in life. The transition took several weeks to arrange properly. Elena worked with social services to ensure all legal requirements were met, consulted with educational specialists to assess Marcus's academic needs, and coordinated with contractors to prepare spaces in Ba, her home for both Harold and Marcus. During this time, the daily reading sessions continued on the park bench, but now they carried an air of anticipation and planning. Harold and Marcus discussed books they wanted to explore together, subjects Marcus was interested in studying, and Harold's stories about his years as an architect. I always wanted to design schools, Harold confided one afternoon as they sat in the December sunshine. Buildings that would inspire learning and creativity. I did design a few, but most of my work was commercial or residential. Now I'm wondering if it's too late to share that knowledge with someone who might use it. You mean like helping clan schools? Marcus asked, intrigued. Exactly. Elena's company does some educational construction. Perhaps we could work together on projects that would make learning environments better for students like you. Marcus's eyes lit up with excitement. That would be amazing. We could design schools that actually make kids want to be there. Now you're thinking like an architect, Harold said with pride. Form follows function, but both should serve the human spirit. These conversations were observed by Elena, who continued her daily vigil from across the street, but now openly rather than in secret. She had introduced herself to other park regulars and had begun to understand the small community that had formed around Harold and Marcus's friendship. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who fed pigeons near the bench each morning, told Elena how Marcus always greeted her politely and sometimes helped her carry her bag of birdseed. Tony, a young man who maintained the park's limited landscaping, mentioned that Marcus had once helped him plant new flowers around the playground, refusing payment but accepting Tony's offer to teach him about different plants. That boy's got a good heart, Tony had said. Never seen anything like how he takes care of Harold. Most kids his age wouldn't even notice an old blind man, let alone spend time with him every day. These observations reinforced Elena's conviction that she was making the right decision. Marcus wasn't just kind to Harold, he was genuinely caring toward everyone he encountered. This wasn't a performance or an attempt to gain something. It was simply who he was at his core. The day finally came for Marcus and Harold to leave the bench behind. Elena arrived in the early afternoon with a moving truck and several helpers to collect Harold's few belongings from his rooming house and Marcus's possessions from his grandmother's apartment. Rosa had decided to make the transition with them, accepting Elena's offer of a small apartment in a senior living community just minutes from Elena's house. It wasn't charity, Elena had explained, but rather an investment in keeping Marcus's support system intact during a major life change. As the afternoon reading time approached, the three of them walked to the park together for what would be their final session on the bench. Marcus carried the same worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird they had been working through, while Harold walked between him and Elena, one hand on each of their arms. Other park regulars had somehow learned that this was a farewell day. Mrs. Chen was there with her pigeons. Tony had taken a break from his landscaping work, and several other people who had grown accustomed to seeing the daily reading ritual had gathered at a respectful distance. Marcus began reading from where they had left off the day before, his voice carrying across the small park as it had for months. But today his words seemed to carry extra weight, a recognition that this simple act had grown into something much larger than either he or Harold had anticipated. When he finished the chapter, Harold reached over and took the book from Marcus's hands. "This has been our book," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The first one we shared, the one that brought us together. I want you to keep it always, as a reminder of where our friendship began." Marcus accepted the book with reverence, understanding that it had become much more than a collection of pages and words. It was a symbol of connection, of the power of stories to bridge differences and create understanding between people. "Are you ready?" Elena asked gently. Harold nodded, standing slowly from the bench he had occupied for so many months. "I'm ready," he said. Then, turning toward the small gathering of people who had come to see them off, he raised his voice slightly. "Thank you all for making an old man feel welcome in your community. This park, this bench, these people, they gave me hope when I had lost it. I won't forget." Mrs. Chen stepped forward with a small wrapped package. "For your new home," she said, pressing it into Harold's hands. "Something to remember us by." Tony approached with a small potted plant. "Figured you might want to do some gardening," he said to Marcus. "This little guy is pretty hardy. Should do well wherever you plant him." As they walked away from the bench toward Elena's car, Marcus looked back once at the place where his life had changed so dramatically. The bench sat empty now, but somehow it didn't look lonely. It looked like a place where magic had happened, where an ordinary afternoon had transformed into an extraordinary friendship. Elena's house was everything Marcus had imagined a wealthy person's home might be, but it was also warm and welcoming in ways he hadn't expected. Elena had worked with an interior designer to create spaces that would feel comfortable for both Harold and Marcus, not just impressive or expensive. Harold's suite included a sitting room with comfortable chairs positioned to catch the afternoon sun, a bedroom with a bed that was easy for him to navigate, and a bathroom designed with safety features that didn't feel institutional. Most importantly, it included a library room with built-in shelving and comfortable reading chairs, where he and Marcus could continue their daily sessions. Marcus's room was larger than the entire apartment he had shared with his grandmother, but Elena had been careful not to make it so elaborate that he would feel uncomfortable. The walls were lined with bookshelves, already filled with classics, contemporary novels, and educational books chosen specifically for his interests and reading level. "We can change anything you don't like," Elena said as she showed Marcus around his new space. "I want this to feel like your room, not a guest room." Marcus ran his fingers along the spines of the books, many of which he had never heard of, but all of which seemed to call out for exploration. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "I've never had so many books in one place." "They're all yours," Eleanor replied. "And that's just the beginning. We'll keep adding to the collection as you discover new interests and authors." That evening, the three of them shared their first dinner together in Elena's dining room. The meal was prepared by a housekeeper named Mrs. Patterson, who had worked for Elena for several years and had been briefed on the new family arrangements. "Mrs. Patterson," Elena explained, "will help with meals and general household management, but this is our home, not a hotel. We all contribute to making it work." Harold seemed more relaxed than Marcus had seen him in months. The stress of living day to day, of worrying about basic needs, had lifted from his shoulders. He sat straighter, spoke more confidently, and even made jokes during dinner. Marcus, on the other hand, was quieter than usual. The magnitude of the change was beginning to sink in, and he felt somewhat overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding him. Everything was beautiful and comfortable, but it was also unfamiliar and intimidating. Elena noticed his uncertainty. "Marcus, are you okay? I know this is a big adjustment." Marcus nodded, not wanting to seem ungrateful. "It's wonderful," he said. "I just keep thinking about my abuela, wondering if she's okay in her new place. Would you like to call her?" Elena asked immediately. "Or better yet, would you like to visit her? She's only 10 minutes away." Marcus's face brightened. "Could we?" Within minutes, they were in Elena's car, driving to the senior living community, where Rosa had been moved into a comfortable apartment. The facility was nothing like the institutional setting Marcus had feared. It was more like a small neighborhood of apartment buildings with shared common areas and activities. Rosa's apartment was bright and cheerful, with large windows and space for her to display the family photographs and small mementos that meant so much to her. She had been unpacking boxes when they arrived, and Marcus immediately began helping her arrange her belongings. "How are you settling in, Mrs. Rodriguez?" Elena asked. Rosa smiled, her earlier wariness replaced by cautious optimism. "It's very nice," she admitted. "The other residents have been welcoming, and there's a crafts room where I might try those art classes we talked about. And you're close enough that Marcus can visit whenever he wants," Elena added. "In fact, I was hoping you might join us for dinner regularly. I think we all benefit from having family meals together." As they drove back to Elena's house later that evening, Marcus felt more settled. Knowing that his grandmother was comfortable and happy made it easier for him to embrace his own new circumstances. "Elena," Marcus said as they pulled into the driveway, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you sure about all this? I mean, it's a lot of responsibility, taking care of Harold and me. What if we don't live up to your expectations?" Elena turned off the engine and faced Marcus directly. "Marcus, let me tell you what my expectations actually are. I expect you to be yourself, the same kind, thoughtful, intelligent boy who befriended my father when he needed it most. I expect you to work hard in school because I know you love learning. I expect you to continue growing into the remarkable person you're already becoming." She paused, her voice becoming more emotional. "But I don't expect perfection. I don't expect you to be grateful every minute, or to never have problems or make mistakes. I expect you to be a 12-year-old boy, with all the challenges and joys that come with that. And I expect all of us to figure this out together, as a family." Harold, who had been listening from the back seat, reached forward and patted Marcus's shoulder. "Families aren't perfect, my boy. They're just people who choose to love each other despite their flaws and differences. Elena and I are still learning how to be father and daughter again after 2 years apart. You're helping us remember what it means to put family first." The first few weeks in their new living arrangement brought both joys and adjustments for everyone. Marcus threw himself into his new school with enthusiasm, marveling at the resources available to him. The private academy Elena had enrolled him in had a library that seemed endless, science labs that actually worked, and teachers who had time to nurture individual students' interests. His English teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, no relation despite the shared surname, was particularly impressed with Marcus's reading comprehension and his ability to analyze literature with unusual depth for someone his age. "Where did you develop such insight into character motivation?" she asked after Marcus delivered a particularly thoughtful analysis of Scout Finch's moral development. Marcus thought about Harold and their months of afternoon discussions about the books they shared. "I had a really good reading partner," he said simply. "He taught me to think about why characters make the choices they do, not just what happens in the story." Meanwhile, Harold was experiencing his own renaissance. Elena had arranged for him to work with an orientation and mobility specialist who helped him navigate his new environment safely, independently. More importantly, she had connected him with the local architecture school, where he began guest lecturing about sustainable design principles and accessibility in building construction. "I never thought I'd teach again," Harold told Marcus one evening as they sat in their shared library. "But talking to those young architecture students, sharing what I've learned over 4 decades in the field, it gives me Purpose again. That's how I feel about tutoring the younger kids at school, Marcus replied. He had volunteered to help struggling readers in the elementary grades, finding that his experience reading aloud to Harold had given him unusual patience and skill in making stories come alive. For children. When I see their faces light up because they finally understand a difficult passage, it reminds me why I want to be a teacher. Elena watched both of them flourishing and felt a deep satisfaction she had never experienced in her business success. Wellington Industries continued to grow under her leadership, but now her work had additional meaning. She began steering the company toward projects that would benefit communities like the one where she had found Marcus: schools, libraries, community centers, and affordable housing developments. I want our buildings to serve people the way Marcus served my father, she explained to her board of directors when they questioned the lower profit margins on these projects. Sometimes the most important work isn't the most profitable work. One evening in February, as winter began to give way to spring, the three of them were sharing dinner when Elena made an announcement that surprised both Harold and Marcus. I've been thinking about something, she said, setting down her fork and looking at both of them seriously. This arrangement we have, it's been wonderful, but it's also been somewhat temporary in nature. We've all been adjusting, seeing if we could make it work as a family. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Had they done something wrong? Was Elena having second thoughts about the arrangement? Harold reached across the table and found Marcus's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. What are you saying, Elena? I'm saying I don't want this to be temporary anymore, Eleanor replied, her voice filled with emotion. I want to make this official. Marcus, I want to adopt you formally, if you'll have me. And Dad, I want us to stop pretending that we're just housemates. I want us to be a real family, legally and emotionally. Marcus stared at her in amazement. You want to adopt me? I want to be your mother, if you'll let me, Elena said. Not to replace the parents you lost, or the grandmother who raised you, but to be the person who supports your dreams and worries about your future and celebrates your successes. I want to be family. Harold's face was wet with tears. Elena, are you sure? This is a big step. I've never been more sure of anything, Eleanor replied. These past months have been the happiest I've been since Mom died. Having both of you in my life, seeing Marcus grow and thrive, watching you rediscover your passion for teaching and architecture. It's shown me what was missing from my life before. Marcus looked back and forth between them, these two people who had become so important to him. Would I still be Marcus Rodriguez? You could be Marcus Rodriguez Wellington, or Marcus Wellington Rodriguez, or just Marcus Rodriguez if you prefer, Elena said. The name isn't what makes you family. The love and commitment are what matter. And I could still visit Abuela all the time? Every day if you want, Elena assured him. Rosa will always be your grandmother. I'm just asking to be another person who loves you and wants the best for you. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how much his life had changed since that first day when he approached Harold on the park bench. Then he looked up at Elena with a smile that lit up his entire face. I would like that very much, he said. I would like to be your son. The adoption process took several months to complete, during which time Marcus continued to excel in school, and Harold expanded his role at the architecture school. Elena found herself changing in ways she hadn't expected. The driven businesswoman who had once worked 16-hour days now made sure to be home for dinner every night. She attended Marcus's school events, helped him with homework, and learned to braid Rose's hair when the older woman visited for their weekly family dinners. You're different, Harold observed one evening, as he and Elena sat on the back patio while Marcus did homework inside. Softer, but also stronger somehow. Elena considered this. I think I spent so many years trying to prove myself in business that I forgot there were other ways to measure success. Watching Marcus grow, seeing how naturally kindness comes to him, it's reminded me that character matters more than achievement. Though his achievements are pretty impressive too, Harold noted with pride. Marcus had just been selected for the Academic Honor Society and had won a district-wide essay contest about community service. He wrote that essay about you, you know, Elena said, about how reading to you taught him that service isn't about grand gestures, It's about showing up consistently for the people who need you. Harold wiped away a tear. That boy has taught me as much as I've taught him. Maybe more. The official adoption ceremony took place on a warm day in June, exactly 9 months after Elena had first approached them at the park bench. Rosa was there, beaming with pride, as she watched her grandson gain a second family. Several of Marcus's teachers attended, along with Harold's colleagues from the architecture school and some of Elena's business associates, who had become invested in the family story. But the most meaningful moment came when Judge Patricia Hoffman asked Marcus if he understood what adoption meant and if this was truly what he wanted. Marcus stood up straight and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I understand that adoption means Elena will legally be my mother and will be responsible for taking care of me. But I think it means more than that. I think it means we're promising to love each other and support each other and be there for each other, no matter what happens. Elena has already been doing that for months. And so has Harold. They've given me opportunities I never could have imagined, but more than that, they've given me a family." He paused, his voice becoming stronger. "Before I met Harold, I thought being alone was just something I had to accept. My parents died. And my abuela worked so hard just to survive that I tried not to be any more trouble than I had to be. But Harold taught me that everyone deserves to have someone who cares about them, and Elena has shown me that families can be created by choice, not just by birth." Judge Hoffman smiled as she signed the adoption papers. "Marcus Rodriguez Wellington, welcome to your new legal family." The celebration afterward was held at Elena's house, with a backyard barbecue that brought together people from all aspects of their new life together. Mrs. Chen from the park was there, having become an honorary grandmother figure to Marcus. Tony, the park maintenance worker, brought plants from his personal garden as housewarming gifts. Marcus's teachers mingled with Harold's architecture students, and Elena's business colleagues got to see a side of their CEO they had never witnessed before. But the most special moment came when Marcus asked for everyone's attention and pulled out a wrapped package. "When I first started reading to Harold," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "I never imagined it would lead to all this. I just knew that he seemed lonely and I had books he couldn't read anymore. But that simple thing, just sharing stories together, changed all our lives." He unwrapped the package to reveal a framed photograph taken by a local newspaper photographer who had done a story about their unusual friendship months earlier. The picture showed Marcus reading to Harold on their park bench, both of them completely absorbed in the story, surrounded by the modest beauty of their small neighborhood park. "Elena, Harold, this picture represents the moment when everything began. I wanted to have a place of honor in our home, to remind us that the biggest changes in life often start with the smallest acts of kindness." Elena accepted the photograph, with tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect, Marcus. We'll hang it in the library, where we continue our reading tradition." Harold reached out to touch the frame, his fingers tracing the edges of the image he couldn't see, but whose moment he remembered perfectly. "That bench gave us to each other," he said. "I'll always be grateful for the day a young boy decided that an old man was worth his time." As the party continued around them, Marcus found himself standing with Elena and Harold in a quiet corner of the yard, watching their friends and family celebrate together. A year ago, he could never have imagined this scene, himself at the center of such love and support, surrounded by people who cared about his future and believed in his dreams. "Are you happy?" Elena asked, putting her arm around his shoulders. Marcus looked around at the celebration, at Rosa laughing with Mrs. Chen, at Harold deep in conversation with one of his architecture students about accessible design principles, at Elena's business colleagues learning about community gardens from Tony. This gathering represented everything he had learned about the power of connection, about how individual acts of kindness could ripple outward to create something beautiful and lasting. "I'm happy," he said simply. "But more than that, I'm grateful, and I'm excited about what comes next." What came next exceeded even Marcus's expanding expectations. As he progressed through high school, he continued to excel academically while deepening his commitment to community service. He started a reading program at the local elementary school, recruiting high school volunteers to work with struggling readers, using techniques he had developed during his sessions with Harold. Elena's company began incorporating Marcus's insights about community needs into their development projects. When Wellington Industries designed a new community center for the neighborhood where Marcus had grown up, he worked alongside Harold to ensure the building would truly serve the families who lived there. Architecture should reflect the dreams of the people who will use the building, Harold explained to Marcus as they reviewed the plans together. Not just the architect's vision, but the community's needs and aspirations. The community center included a large library with comfortable reading nooks, after-school tutoring spaces, and a computer lab where residents could access educational resources and job training programs. When it opened, Marcus was invited to speak at the dedication ceremony. This building represents what happens when people with resources choose to invest in communities rather than just extracting profit from them, Marcus told the gathered crowd. But buildings are just structures. What makes them meaningful is how people use them to connect with each other and build better lives. As Marcus approached his senior year of high school, college recruiters from prestigious universities began reaching out to him. His academic record was exceptional, his essay writing was sophisticated and heartfelt, and his commitment to community service was both extensive and genuine. "I could get you into any college in the country," his guidance counselor told him during a planning meeting that included Elena and Harold. "Your test scores and grades are excellent. Your extracurricular activities show real leadership, and your personal story is compelling. Where would you like to apply?" Marcus had given this question considerable thought. "I want to go somewhere I can study education and community development," he said. "Somewhere that values service as much as academic achievement. And I want to stay close enough to visit home regularly." Elena smiled at his use of the word home. After 3 years together, their family unit had become as natural and comfortable as if they had been together since Marcus's birth. Harold leaned forward in his chair. "What about the state university? They have an excellent education program, and you could double major in education and urban planning. Plus, it's only 2 hours from here." "The state university has also offered him a full scholarship," Elena added. "Though cost isn't a concern for us, the scholarship is recognition of his achievements." Marcus nodded. "I think that's where I want to go. I can study what I'm passionate about, I can come home whenever I want, and I can start building connections with other people who want to make a difference in education." The decision made, Marcus's senior year became a celebration of how far he had come and preparation for the next phase of his journey. He was valedictorian of his graduating class, giving a commencement speech about the power of unexpected friendships and the importance of recognizing opportunity when it appears in humble forms. 4 years ago, Marcus told his fellow graduates and their families, "I was a boy with big dreams but limited prospects. I lived in subsidized housing with my grandmother, worried about whether we could pay the electric bill, and wondered if college would ever be more than a fantasy. Then I met an old man sitting alone on a park bench, and everything changed." He looked out into the audience, finding Elena, Harold, and Rosa sitting together in the front row. "I learned that kindness is never wasted, that small acts of service can have enormous consequences, and that families can be created by choice and sustained by love. I learned that opportunity often comes disguised as ordinary moments, and that the most important thing you can do with privilege is use it to lift up others." As Marcus prepared to leave for college, the family established new traditions to maintain their connection despite the physical distance. Harold would email Marcus recordings of himself reading books, continuing their shared literary journey in a new format. Elena scheduled weekly video calls to stay involved in Marcus's academic and social life. Rosa insisted on care packages filled with homemade cookies and hand-knitted scarves. But perhaps the most meaningful tradition was their monthly return to the park bench where it all began. The first Saturday of every month, when Marcus was home from college, the three of them would walk to the small neighborhood park and sit on their old bench. Sometimes Marcus would read aloud, sometimes they would just talk, and sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, remembering how far they had all come. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked Elena during one of these visits. "Taking such a big risk on a kid you barely knew?" Elena considered the question seriously. "The only thing I regret is waiting 6 weeks to approach you instead of doing it immediately." We could have had 6 more weeks together. Harold chuckled. I think the timing was perfect. You needed to see who Marcus really was before you could appreciate what he had to offer. And Marcus and I needed those months together to build the foundation of trust that made everything else possible. Marcus looked around the park, noting the improvements that had been made over the years. Wellington Industries had donated materials for new playground equipment. The community had organized to plant flower gardens, and the bench where they sat had been refurbished and dedicated with a small plaque that quote, "Read. In honor of the power of friendship to transform lives." I've been thinking, Marcus said as his sophomore year of college approached. When I graduate and become a teacher, I want to do something special. I want to start a program that connects kids who love reading with adults who could benefit from companionship, like what we had, but organized and sustainable. Elena's eyes lit up with interest. Tell me more about this idea. Well, there are lots of elderly people in nursing homes and assisted living facilities who are lonely and isolated. And there are lots of kids who love to read but don't have anyone to share that passion with. What if we created a program that brought them together regularly? Harold nodded thoughtfully. Intergenerational programming. It benefits both groups. The children develop empathy and communication skills while the elderly participants maintain mental stimulation and social connection. Exactly, Marcus said excitedly. And it could be expanded beyond reading. The adults could share life stories, teach traditional skills, help with homework. The kids could help with technology, share current events, bring energy and optimism. Elena was already thinking about the logistics. We could pilot it through Wellington Industries' community outreach program, partner with schools and senior living facilities, provide transportation, maybe even design spaces specifically for these intergenerational activities. You would do that? Marcus asked, though he wasn't really surprised. Over the years, Elena had proven repeatedly that she was committed to using her resources to support initiatives that strengthened communities. Marcus, this program could help thousands of people experience what the three of us have shared, Eleanor replied. How could I not support it? By the time Marcus graduated from college, with dual degrees in education and community development, the pilot program was already operating in 6 locations across the state. Reading Bridges, as they had named it, paired elementary school students with senior citizens for weekly reading and conversation sessions. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Children in the program showed improved reading comprehension, increased empathy, and better social skills. Senior participants reported reduced feelings of loneliness, increased cognitive stimulation, and a greater sense of purpose. Several intergenerational friendships developed that continued outside the formal program structure. Marcus was hired as the program's first full-time coordinator, a position that allowed him to combine his teaching skills with his passion for community building. His job involved training volunteers, developing curriculum, expanding to new sites, and documenting the program's impact for funding purposes. You've created something beautiful, Harold told Marcus as they reviewed the first-year evaluation report together. Something that will outlast all of us and continue changing lives long after we're gone. Marcus looked up from the statistics and testimonials spread across the table. We created it together, he corrected. None of this would exist if you hadn't been sitting on that bench, willing to let a strange kid read to you. And none of it would exist if Elena hadn't had the courage to step out of her car and introduce herself, Harold added. Elena, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, joined them at the table. And none of it would exist if Marcus hadn't had the compassion to notice a lonely old man and the generosity to share his time and books. Marcus smiled at this familiar conversation. Over the years, each of them had regularly tried to credit the others with creating the circumstances that brought them together. It had become a loving argument that none of them ever won because they were all right. I think we all made choices that led to this moment, Marcus said diplomatically. But I also think something bigger than all of us was at work. Call it fate, call it providence, call it the universe's sense of justice. Something wanted us to find each other. As Marcus's career in education and community development flourished, he never forgot the personal relationships that had made his success possible. He visited Rosa every week until her peaceful death at age 84, holding her hand as she passed away surrounded by the family she had helped create. He supported Harold through increasing health challenges, ensuring that the older man maintained his dignity and independence as long as possible. And he continued to learn from Elena, who had proven that wealth could be a tool for justice when wielded by someone with a genuine commitment to service. Under her leadership, Wellington Industries became known throughout the region for its community-centered approach to development, creating buildings and spaces that served local needs rather than just generating maximum profit. "You changed my company as much as I changed your life," Elena told Marcus one evening, as they reviewed plans for a new school designed using principles Harold had developed for creating learning environments that inspired creativity and critical thinking. "Good," Marcus replied with a grin. "That was always part of the plan." When Harold passed away at age 78, Marcus delivered the eulogy at a service attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the quiet architect's wisdom and kindness. Architecture students, Reading Bridges participants, fellow residents from the park community, and business leaders who had worked with Elena all came to pay their respects. "Harold Wellington taught me that dignity comes not from what you can do, but from who you choose to be," Marcus said from the pulpit. "He showed me that wisdom is meant to be shared, that experience becomes meaningful only when it's passed on to the next generation. He proved that age is not about the number of years you've lived, but about how fully you've embraced each day you've been given." End quote. Marcus looked out at the congregation, seeing Elena in the front row with tears streaming down her face, surrounded by the extended family they had all created together. "Harold also taught me that the best teachers are often the ones who don't realize they're teaching. He thought I was doing him a favor by reading to him, but he was giving me an education in compassion, resilience, and hope that no classroom could have provided." End quote. After Harold's death, Marcus and Elena grew even closer, united in their grief and their determination to honor his memory through their continued work. Elena established the Harold Wellington Foundation for intergenerational programming, providing funding for Reading Bridges expansion and similar initiatives nationwide. Marcus, now in his late 20s, had become a recognized expert in community-based education and intergenerational programming. He spoke at conferences, consulted with school districts, and continued to coordinate Reading Bridges, which had grown to serve over 3,000 participants across 12 states. But perhaps his most important role was as Elena's son, a relationship that had deepened and matured over the years into something that transcended its unusual origins. They had family dinners together every Sunday, took annual vacations to places they had dreamed of visiting, and supported each other through life's inevitable challenges and celebrations. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped to talk to Harold that first day?" Marcus asked Elena one evening as they sat in the library of the house they now shared as adult family members. Elena considered the question, looking up at the framed photograph of Marcus reading to Harold on the park bench that still held a place of honor on the mantel. "I think you would have found some other way to make a difference in the world," she said. "And I think Harold and I would have eventually found our way back to each other. But I don't think any of us would have discovered what we were truly capable of without the others." Marcus nodded, understanding that their story was both unique and universal. Everyone had the potential to change someone else's life through simple acts of kindness and attention. The difference was being willing to take the risk, to step outside one's comfort zone, to see past surface differences to the common humanity that connected all people. "I want to write a book about all this," Marcus said suddenly. "About reading bridges, about intergenerational programming, but also about how individual choices can create ripple effects that change multiple lives." Elena smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea. What would you call it?" Marcus thought for a moment, then looked again at the photograph of himself and Harold on the bench. "I think I'd call it The Bench That Changed Everything. Because that's where it all started, with two people willing to share stories and time." "And where will it end?" Elena asked. Marcus considered this question seriously. "I don't think it ends," he said finally. "I think it just keeps expanding. Every kid in Reading Bridges who learns to connect with an older adult might grow up to be more compassionate. Every senior citizen who feels valued and heard might inspire someone else to see aging differently. Every family like ours that forms through choice rather than birth might show others new possibilities for creating love and support. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Harold had loved to sit in his final years, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood around them. I think the real story isn't about what happened to us. It's about what we do with what we received. How we use the love and opportunities we were given to make the world a little better for other people. Elena joined him at the window, putting her arm around the shoulders of the son she had chosen and who had chosen her in return. "Then we better get to work," she said with a smile. "We have a lot more love to share." Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through the trees, illuminating the garden where Harold had spent countless hours listening to Marcus read, where three separate lives had woven together into something stronger and more beautiful than any of them could have created alone. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of children playing in the park. Perhaps some of them participating in reading bridges, perhaps others just discovering the joy of stories and friendship. The bench where it all began still sat in its small neighborhood park, now part of a memorial garden maintained by the community. A brass plaque had been added to commemorate Harold and the intergenerational friendship that had inspired a movement. But the bench's real monument was the thousands of lives that had been touched by the simple idea that everyone deserves to have someone who cares about them. And in the library of the house they shared, Marcus began writing the first words of the book that would tell their story, beginning as all the best stories do, with a simple truth that changed everything. Every afternoon, a poor boy reads aloud to a blind man sitting on a street bench, never knowing that someone is watching, and that this small act of kindness is about to transform all their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The story of Marcus, Harold, and Elena had become larger than any of them, but it had also remained as simple and powerful as it was on that first day when a 12-year-old boy decided that an old man sitting alone deserved to hear a story. Love had multiplied love, kindness had created opportunity, and three people had discovered that the most important families are often the ones we choose for ourselves.